There are millions of people discussing narcissistic abuse online, and it had penetrated the scholarly literature as well. My name is Sam Vaknin. I'm a visiting professor of psychology in Southern Federal University in Rostov-on-Don in Russia, and I'm a professor of finance and a professor of psychology in the outreach program of CIAPS, Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies. I'm also the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and a host of other books about personality disorders. In 1995, I coined the phrase narcissistic abuse. And I felt the need to coin a new phrase because I wanted to describe a subtype of abusive behavior that was pernicious, nefarious, all-pervasive across multiple areas of life and involved a plethora of behaviors and manipulative or coercive techniques. Narcissistic abuse was not like all other types of abuse. It differed from other types of abuse in its range, in its sophistication, in its duration, in its versatility, express and premeditated intention to negate and to vitiate the victim's personal autonomy, agency, self-efficacy, and ultimately well-being. And it was the only type of abuse that could be practiced either surreptitiously, under the radar, or overtly, openly. So very often narcissistic abuse masquerades in a variety of ways. It becomes gaslighting, it becomes ambient abuse. The narcissist uses other people, which I coined another phrase to describe. I called them flying monkeys. So this type of abuse co-opts, recruits an entire community to do its bidding. It's not isolated like other types of abuse where there's a one-on-one abusive interaction. Rejection, humiliation, physical abuse, verbal abuse. It's an integrated network approach to abuse. Everything becomes weaponized. Everything is used against the victim. People in the victim's life, the victim's family, friends, workplace, associations, interests, hobbies, fears, hopes, priorities, wishes. Confidential information shared in moments of intimacy. This information is weaponized as well, is used against the victim at a later stage. I keep saying victim because while in the throes of narcissistic abuse, within a shared fantasy, within a shared psychotic space, the prey is immobilized. It's like these animals in nature who first inject the prey with poison, paralytic poison, nerve agent. And then the prey is immobilized. It has a freeze response. It's incapable of flight, incapable of fight. It just freezes there like a deer with the headlights. Only much later, victims can become survivors. But even then, they carry the abuse with them in a variety of ways, which is the topic of today's paper. The victims of narcissistic abuse appeared at the time when I coined the phrase and was the first to describe this type of abuse. They appear to present a clinical picture substantially different to victims of other, more pinpointed, more goal-oriented types of abuse. The victims of narcissistic abuse were more depressed, more anxious, much more disoriented, aggressive. There was defiant reactance. They took on traits and behaviors which are typical of narcissists and psychopaths. Defensively, they became dissociative. So they showed all kinds of dissociative symptoms, such as depersonalization, derealization, or even amnesia. And all of them felt trapped. They felt trapped or hopeless. In other words, they have acquired learned helplessness. Learned helplessness which was inculcated into them via intermittent reinforcement, via operant conditioning. They were in the throes of trauma bonding, the famous Stockholm syndrome. It was a kind of cultish shared psychosis or shared psychotic disorder, folie à deux. Repeated abuse has long-lasting, very long-lasting, pernicious and traumatic effects, such as panic attacks, hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, flashbacks, intrusive memories, suicidal ideation, and psychosomatic symptoms. All these have been amply documented over the past at least 70 years, if not 100 years. The victims experience shame, depression, anxiety, embarrassment, guilt, humiliation, abandonment, and an enhanced sense of vulnerability. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, complex PTSD, has been proposed as a new mental health diagnosis at the time by Dr. Judith Herman of Harvard University to account for the impact of extended periods of trauma and abuse. Classic PTSD is, of course, a reaction to a single, harrowing, shattering external shock. Complex PTSD or complex trauma is a reaction to repeated shocks, however minor. In the article Stalking, an overview of the problem, published in the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, 1998, volume 43, pages 473-476, in that article, authors Karen Abrams and Gail Ehrlich Robinson wrote the following. Initially, there is often much denial by the victim. Over time, however, the stress begins to erode the victim's life and psychological brutalization results. Sometimes the victim develops an almost fatal resolve that inevitably one day she will be murdered. That's persecutory or paranoid ideation. Victims unable to live a normal life describe feeling stripped of self-worth and self-dignity. Personal control and resources, psychosocial development, social support, pre-morbid personality traits, and the severity of the stress may all influence how the victim experiences and responds to the abuse. Victims stalked by ex-lovers may experience additional guilt and lowered self-esteem for perceived poor judgment in their relationship choices. Many victims become isolated and deprived of support when employers or friends, or I add family members, withdraw after also being subjected to harassment, or when they are cut off by the victim in order to protect them. Other tangible consequences include financial losses from quitting jobs, moving, and buying expensive security equipment in an attempt to gain privacy. Changing homes and jobs results in both material losses and a loss of self-respect. Now, this particular article deals with stalking, but many of the effects and the impacts described here are very common in cases of narcissistic abuse, and one could even argue that narcissistic abuse is much closer to stalking, paranoid, dangerous stalking, than to classic abuse. Surprisingly, verbal, psychological, and emotional abuse have the same effects as the physical variety. I refer you to Psychology Today, the September-October 2000 issue, page 24.